Welcome everybody to the webinar. I thought it'd be relevant given the change of seasons now coming on late spring and getting into summer that we focus our discussion on thunderstorms. And the way I'm going to do this is split it up into kind of 4 segments. We're going to start with a discussion on what it takes to create a thunderstorm. We'll break for some questions and we'll go into the second session, which will discuss the life cycle of thunderstorms, followed by a section on weather tactics, and finally a section on NEXRAD. So we'll begin first with what it takes to create a thunderstorm. And the relevance here is this is what you want to look at in your pre-flight briefing, either the evening before or early in the morning of. The analogy I use is baking a cake. Now, I've never baked a cake before, but my understanding is you have to have the correct ingredients, and not only the correct ingredients, but those ingredients in the right amounts, or you're not going to have a cake. It's very similar with the birth of a thunderstorm. You have to have these ingredients on the slide here in order to get a thunderstorm, and they have to be present in the correct amounts. Temperature is tied into water, so really we're looking at moisture, instability, and lifting, but you do need dew points in excess of 13 degrees Celsius. Now, that's not the ambient temperature we're talking about. Here we're talking about dew points. Those can be found on METARs along your route of flight, so no special knowledge really required for that element. Moisture and instability and lifting do require a little bit of digging. I'm going to talk about each one of those, but I know you all have your own favorite website that you like to go through or go to for pre-flight briefings, so I'm not going to interfere with that. We will discuss really a one-stop shop for getting this information that I think will make it a lot easier on you. And we'll start out first with moisture. I prefer to use the K-index as sort of an analog to the amount of moisture that's available in the atmosphere to create a thunderstorm. It's one of the 3 ingredients: moisture, instability, and lifting. And the K-index value that I'm looking for is a K-index value greater than 25. So we're looking at the thunderstorm probability with a K-index of over plus 25, of 40 to 60%. And that puts you in the realm of high probability for a thunderstorm. We'll look at atmospheric instability, and there I use 2 indices. I use lifted index and CAPE, and we'll define those in just a minute here. Lifted index is somewhat of a snapshot view of the atmosphere up to 18,000 feet. The reason I like this index is it's pretty simple. If the index is positive, any number that's positive, the likelihood of thunderstorms is pretty remote because there's just not enough instability in the atmosphere. If the lifted index is negative, then you do have an unstable atmosphere. And the more negative, the more unstable the atmosphere. So I'm looking at, if you want to write things down, I'm looking at a lifted index of -2 or more negative, defining a fairly unstable atmosphere. CAPE is a little bit more complex. It's defined as convective available potential energy, and this is more of a moving picture. So whereas lifted index was somewhat of a snapshot of the lower part of the atmosphere, CAPE is more representative of the entire troposphere that we fly in. So from basically the ground up through 40,000 feet. And the number I'm looking for here in terms of convective available potential energy is numbers of 1,500 or greater. That indicates a fairly moderate amount of instability in the atmosphere. So again, I I incorporate both lifted index and CAPE when I'm looking for instability. And then I promised you that there's kind of a one-stop shop where you can get all of this information. And that's the SkewT Log P diagram. Now, we're not really going to get into that. We don't have enough time for it for this webinar. But I want to show you where you can easily get those figures. My preference is to download the app for SkewT Log Pro, not Log P, but Log Pro. It's an app available for your iPhone or for your iPad, and I think it's available on Android devices as well. And it makes it fairly easy to work with the SkewT Log P diagram. In the upper right-hand corner, the thing you want to look for in the summer is in the upper right-hand corner, you have the CAPE, the K-index, and the lifted index, KI being the K-index. So in this particular location, at this particular time, CAPE is above 1,000, so that's starting to indicate some atmospheric instability. There's plenty of moisture in the atmosphere, so the K-index is above 25, and remember that was my number that I tend to use in my pre-flight planning, and lifted index is -3. Now that's pretty significant. Why isn't CAPE any higher? Well, the area of instability in the atmosphere is from 18,000 feet down to basically the ground. Above 18,000 feet, it's not that unstable. So thunderstorms, if they do develop, at least at this point, may not get very high. But what you're looking for is CAPE above 1,500, lifted index in the negative numbers, and then more negative, I mean lifted indices of -5 or -6 are really significant. And then you have to have moisture, and that's the K-index above +25. So given those things, we now have covered moisture and instability in this kind of one-stop shop. And the only thing left is really lifting forces. Now, in order for a thunderstorm to get going, you have to be able to lift a parcel of air till it becomes buoyant and will rise on its own. And that has to do with the difference between the temperature of that air parcel relative to the ambient temperature surrounding it in the atmosphere. And sources of lifting are indicated on this slide. We have convection, which is really the diurnal or uneven heating of the Earth's surface during the day, mostly occurring or mostly getting ramped up in the afternoon. We've got orographic lifting in the upper right portion of that slide, present in the Appalachians, Rocky Mountains, Cascades, etc., not very present in the Midwest or Southeast. We have low pressure systems which act as a vacuum to suck air in and elevate it. So anytime you're going to be in a low pressure, an area of low pressure, that is one of the necessities for a thunderstorm. And finally, probably the more common lifting force is a cold front. So let's pause here for some questions.
Yeah, I've been kind of going through the questions here, and I think right now people are still just getting some of their questions together. For clarity, you might want to spend just one more second on dew point temperature spreads as well as the K-index, if you would.
Okay. Well, I wasn't really referencing a dew point temperature spread. You're just looking for dew points in excess of 13 degrees Celsius, and you would find that, of course, on the METAR. The K-index is analogous to, it's not a direct measurement of the moisture in the atmosphere, but it's an indirect measurement. And the K-index can be found most easily on the SkewT Log P chart. You don't have to understand how to read a SkewT Log P, but it'll be in the upper right-hand corner, abbreviated as KI. And when that number gets above 25, plus 25, that indicates a sufficient amount of moisture in the atmosphere for thunderstorm.
Okay, very good, Bill. Emma had another question, and she says, I learned about CAPE and that it did make sense for helping me understand where the thunderstorm tops were. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, CAPE is a calculated measurement. Let me back up to that slide. If you look in this particular slide, you see a red line, a blue line, and a purple line. Where the purple line gets to the right side of the red line, that's an unstable atmosphere. And the area between the red and the purple line define the degree of instability. And that, using calculus, works out to the CAPE, or convective available potential energy. The longer, or I guess the higher in the atmosphere that purple line stays to the right of the red line, the larger CAPE is going to be, because it's measuring that area between those two lines. And the top, I guess the top, where the purple line crosses back to the left side of the red line, and this is probably getting a little more complex. We do get into this kind of detail at the CPPP, so I encourage you, if you want to learn more, to sign up for a CPPP. But where that purple line crosses back over to the left side of the red line is usually the limit for thunderstorm development or tops. But the ultimate, and I don't want to get this in too much detail, but the ultimate cap for the thunderstorm is a temperature inversion. And if you look up at the very top of that graph, you'll see the red line starts going to the right instead of continuing to lean towards the left. I'm talking about the red line now, not the purple line. And that's really the level at which will cap thunderstorm development. It's a temperature inversion.
Excellent, Bill. That's great. We had one other question I think you might be able to take for us, and that was, does the SkewT app only provide coverage in the U.S.? Do you happen to know that?
No, it will provide coverage in Canada. I'm not sure about Mexico. I think there are some weather stations in Canada that you can, or in Mexico, that you can get off of the government SkewT charts. But I think SkewT Log Pro is more United States and Canada. There are weather balloons that are released all over the world. So it's not just the United States that uses this SkewT Log P diagram. And again, we have a whole course on SkewT Log P at the CPPP.
You know, it's funny, Bill, I was thinking the same thing because, yes, you can't get SkewTs for other parts of the world, but that's covered in one of the CPPP classes, so I don't want to dig too far in that hole. One other question from Jay Haley is, are you talking about the dew points on the surface, or is this SkewT graph somehow in the atmosphere as well?
No, the dew points I'm talking about are surface dew points. When they exceed 13 degrees Celsius, then you have enough. It's difficult to explain that without getting into a lengthy discussion, which unfortunately we really don't have time for. But it's the dew points on the METARs, which are surface dew points, that I'm talking about. When they exceed 13 degrees Celsius, you can hold enough moisture in the atmosphere to get your K-index above 25. That's probably the short answer.
Okay, fair enough. Does the presence of a dry line have the same effect as a cold front? That might be a little off topic for tonight. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, the dry line is a front. So a front's simply a line that separates two parts of the atmosphere. And normally we refer to fronts that separate portions of the atmosphere related to temperature. A dry line separates two portions of the atmosphere related to moisture content. So you frequently will see these dry lines in Texas or New Mexico because you've got very, very dry air coming off the deserts to the left of that front line. And you have very moist air being sucked up from the Gulf of Mexico on the right-hand side of that line. So the dry line is represented by a brownish line with blisters on it on the side of the moisture.
Very good. Well, I tell you, Bill, now the questions are just raining in, so I might have to slow them down here just a little bit.
Okay.
But
We want to make
here's
sure
one.
we get through everything.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly right. I think we might just take one or two more and then we'll stop. What are some good ways to establish one's own personal minimums as it relates to CAPE, LI, and KI numbers in a go, no-go decision?
I think what I'll do is answer that question after we get through weather tactics. I
Great.
talk about go, no-go decisions. This information, so because it takes those three ingredients, moisture, instability, and lifting, in order to get a thunderstorm, you don't want to waste a lot of time looking at a bunch of other stuff that is available on the internet. You want to focus on those three things. And are those three things K-index above 25, CAPE above 1500, lifted index negative, that sort of thing? That's what you want to focus on along your route of flight. And I'm not really trying to plug SkewT Log Pro as the app, but it allows you to load in your route, and it'll give you SkewT Log P charts all along your route. In the winter, you want to look at the red and blue lines for other reasons. But in the summer, what you really want to direct your attention to is that upper right corner that's got the CAPE and the lifted index and the K-index.
Excellent. Tell you what, Bill, let's let you keep going here. They keep streaming in, but I have a little marker, and we'll pick it up when we have our next break.
Yeah, at the end, we may have plenty of time to answer more questions on that stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about thunderstorm life cycle. And again, this relates to you in your airplane en route. And what I want to focus on is kind of cloud recognition, if you will. All thunderstorms go through a life cycle. There's a developing stage, or sometimes called the cumulus stage. There's the mature stage and the dissipating stage. The difference between an air mass thunderstorm and a steady state thunderstorm is the time element involved in that life cycle. For an air mass thunderstorm, it'll go through the entire life cycle in less than an hour sometimes. A steady state thunderstorm, on the other hand, hence its name, will take hours to go through that life cycle. And I'm going to share with you the reason for that in just a minute here. So let's just walk through this life cycle once. And we'll look at this developing stage or cumulus stage buildup. Now, this is stuff that almost all of the participants have probably flown through at one time or another, and really not a big deal. But when the developing stage or vertical development of this cumulus buildup gets above 10,000 feet, so I'm not talking about from the ground or sea level, but when the vertical extent from the base of the vertical development to the top exceeds 10,000 feet, this becomes significant, and I would go around that rather than through that. We get very few thunderstorms on the coast where I live. In fact, I think we average 3 days of thunderstorms in a year, so that's not much. But we do get a lot of vertically developed clouds, but these are generally 6,000 or 8,000 feet in vertical development. And rather than getting vectored constantly around these things, I'll often just simply go through them. It's a little bumpy, and you get a little bit of rain, but usually not dangerous. But when they exceed 10,000 feet, it becomes significant. Then we go into the mature stage. And what's happening in the cumulus stage is all of this moisture is being uplifted. And these water molecules begin to coalesce into raindrops. And when the updrafts in the thunderstorm can no longer suspend those raindrops or that coalesced water molecules, it begins to fall through the thunderstorm. And that falling creates a downdraft and also defines the onset of the mature stage. So the cumulus stage, you're not going to see much on your NEXRAD or weather radar. It's not until it enters the mature stage that these begin to appear on NEXRAD. So the onset of precipitation is by definition the mature stage. What's happening in the mature stage, though, is that those downdrafts are starting to strangle the updrafts and therefore strangle or cut the life cycle of that of that particular thunderstorm. And here's an example of a mature stage thunderstorm. It's got precipitation associated with it. It's showing up in NEXRAD. And I want you to kind of look at that lumpy mashed potato appearance to the cloud, or that cauliflower type appearance to the cloud. That's a mature stage. Then we go into the dissipating stage, and you get this sort of change to a soft, fuzzy cotton candy appearance to the top of or body of the thunderstorm. And hopefully y'all can see that. You get continued heavy rainfall, mostly downdrafts, and it's still very dangerous, but not as dangerous as the mature stage. And here's another picture of a dissipating thunderstorm. And I think this better represents the pulled cotton or cotton candy appearance to a dissipating thunderstorm. Now, the difference with steady state thunderstorms is you get a lean to the thunderstorm. Now, this lean is internal. It's not something that you can actually see. But what it does is it brings the downdrafts out from the updrafts. It separates the two a little bit, and the storm can continue. So it's not strangling itself, I should say, like an air mass thunderstorm will. So the steady state can continue for hours and hours. And where we see the steady state thunderstorms is out and in front of that cold front represented in this picture. The air mass thunderstorms tend to be in that warm sector between the cold front and the warm front, where that moist air is getting sucked up from the Gulf of Mexico. And that's where the air mass thunderstorms are going to tend to be, with the steady state thunderstorms associated directly with the cold front. All right, so we'll pause there for some more questions on that segment.
Yeah, excellent, Bill. We have one question. It might require us to back up, but okay. I'll just read it as is. Brian is asking, I'm still unclear about the dew point temperature spread. Do they need to be close in order to develop? Sorry to make you back up a little.
Yeah, so it's not a spread. If I use that word spread, I used it incorrectly, and I didn't mean to imply a temperature dew point spread. What I'm talking about is purely the dew point temperature. The spread between the ambient temperature and the dew point can really is not meaningful. If you look at the SkewT Log Ps, you'll often see a dramatic shift of the dew point temperature relative to the ambient temperature. So what I was really talking about, and I understand the confusion here, especially if I did use the word spread. I'm not talking about a spread here. I'm simply talking about it takes dew points above 13 degrees Celsius in order for there to be enough moisture contained in the atmosphere to create thunderstorms.
Very good, Bill. I think that's answering that question.
Hopefully.
Another one came in. It says, when looking at vertical development, are we talking about 10,000 from the ground or 10,000 from the base of the cloud?
Yeah, I'm talking about 10,000 feet from the base of the clouds. Now, it's an arbitrary measure. I read an article the other day that talked about 8,000 feet of vertical development being sufficient to be to contain updrafts that will make you very uncomfortable if you try to fly through that. Obviously, I always try to fly around vertically developed clouds when possible. But my point is that it takes enough instability to create a vertical development of 10,000 feet or greater, not MSL. I'm talking about from the base of the cloud to the top of that developing air mass thunderstorm. It's got to get at least 10,000 feet before it has enough updraft that's pushing that up higher and higher to make it dangerous.
Very good. And Thomas is asking, is an incipient stage steady state thunderstorm dangerous?
Well, if he means, there are different terms, but I think he means by incipient, he means the developing stage. Yeah, I think steady state thunderstorms in general are more dangerous because you can't fly around them. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more in what their tactics, but any steady state system, and you'll see these typically go from Canada to Mexico. associated with a long cold front marching across from Oregon, where I live, down to the East Coast, and it trails this long cold front. And any of those storms are going to be different, difficult to deal with in no matter what stage. But whether it's an incipient or developing stage air mass or an incipient or developing stage steady state thunderstorm, doesn't really matter. It's the ability to develop vertically greater than 10,000 feet from the base of the cloud to the current height of the cloud. If it can develop greater than 10,000 feet, it's probably going to continue into a mature stage at that point, and it gets very dangerous with significant updrafts.
Great. Yeah, I think that helps answer. And so this is a good question, I think, to build right on from that answer, Bill. And that is, how do you tell the height of a building cloud?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I don't know I can give you an answer. I mean, you got to take a look at the altitude of your airplane and then try to guesstimate how much of it's above you, how much of it's below you, and if that adds up to greater than 10,000 feet. Yeah, there is no way that I know of to really estimate that, unless you have airborne radar. Then you can do some tricks to try to estimate the height of the vertical development. But remember, airborne radar, just like NEXRAD, only measures precipitation. So there has to be some precipitation occurring within the cloud really to do that. But the answer is you just have to guesstimate. And if you're nervous about it, go around it. Just ask for deviations.
Use the 101 to get around it, the eyeballs.
Yes.
I think that's a good place for you to start up again, Bill, so I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, so we'll talk a little bit now about weather tactics, and some general strategies incorporate going early in the day, and the statistics are that if you can get to your destination airport by 1 o'clock local time at the destination, statistically you'll avoid about 70% of the air mass thunderstorms. So when you're trying to convince your spouse and your kids to get out of bed before the sun comes up and get out to the airplane and be taken off just as the sun is cresting the horizon, this is the reason why you're going to have less of a chance encountering air mass thunderstorms. Steady state thunderstorms a little different matter. They can go all the way through the night associated with a cold front. But air mass thunderstorms, you're going to be able to avoid about 70% of them if you can get to your destination by lunchtime. Another strategy, and I have this both under the tactical strategies as well as general strategies, is stay visual. And this is my cardinal rule. I have 5 rules of weather, dealing with adverse weather and how to deal with it. My first rule is and this relates to that other question about how do you make your go, no-go decision. I don't do that on the ground, regardless of what the CAPE and the lifted index and so forth are. I don't make that decision on the ground. You can have a hot, muggy day in Atlanta, Georgia, where you can cut the air with the proverbial knife. It's so much moisture in the atmosphere, and yet you don't get thunderstorms. And that's because you're missing a lifting event. The air may be so hazy, the sun doesn't really penetrate it, so you don't get any real uneven heating of the Earth's surface, or there's just not a lifting event to get this started. So you can have a K-index that's high and maybe some instability in the atmosphere with a negative lifted index, or a CAPE, say 1,000 or 1,200 or 1,500 even, and not really get much in the way of any significant thunderstorms. They may be widely spaced. So I go up and fly. And en route, I look outside as much as I'm looking inside at the MFD. And then I start developing a plan if I start to see air mass thunderstorms developing. But the key is when I can no longer get high enough to clear the stratus layered clouds, often but not always associated with these air mass thunderstorms, then I turn around and land and reevaluate the weather. So I will not fly into an area of thunderstorms at night. I learned the lesson the hard way when I used to fly freight at night, and we didn't have any of this fancy equipment to help us out. I didn't know what a CAPE was, or a K-index, or a lifted index back then. And I got hurt several times, mentally and physically, blundering into cumulonimbus clouds. And you don't want to, trust me, you don't want to go there. So my cardinal rule is, if you no longer can stay visual working your way around air mass thunderstorms, then that's the time to quit. But I make that decision en route and not on the ground. Never, ever penetrate a line of thunderstorms. Those are the steady state thunderstorms. Now, if you got a gap that's 40 miles wide, so you have 20 miles off each wind, then I would probably venture through a line of thunderstorms, but really be careful with those. Some tactical strategies: work with ATC to make route changes early. Ask for those deviations as soon as you think you need them. Scroll out the range on your MFD and kind of look to see what general direction you think you're going to want to deviate. Be especially careful and stay clear of those sharply defined cauliflower tops. Why? Because those are the thunderstorms in the mature stage, and that's what you want to avoid. You can get a little closer to the fuzzy topped clouds because those are dissipating. And overall, stay high to stay visual. If you can't stay visual, I would descend, ask for an immediate descent, and start working out where you're going to divert to. Because the worst altitude to enter an air mass thunderstorm is in the mid-teen. If you visualize a thunderstorm, say 30,000 feet, just to make a round number, and you're flying your turbo at 15,000 feet, the area where there's going to be the greatest updrafts and the greatest downdrafts is going to be in the middle of that thunderstorm. At the top, the updrafts have petered out and the downdrafts really haven't started. At the bottom, you're underneath the updraft and you're just really in downdraft. So it's in the middle of that air mass thunderstorm where you don't want to venture. And here's just a picture of me working my way through some air mass thunderstorms. I think I was at 13,000 feet. I'm skewed a little bit to the right because the ones to the left were more of the mature stage. The ones to the right were more of the dissipating stage. So I'm going a little closer. Obviously, I'm not 20 miles away from a thunderstorm there. I'm much closer. But if it gets real turbulent, where am I going to bail? I'm going to probably go down. I have a clear path ahead of me to go down and try to get away from the area of thunderstorms. I could climb, but I'm already at 13 and it's not likely I'm going to top these thunderstorms, so I just stayed where I was and continued to work my way around. An option B, especially with steady state thunderstorms, is to go underneath. And although that's not option A, it is an option. And I got into this situation where I could no longer stay visual, so I descended. And I broke out into nice VFR conditions. You can see these thunderstorms have a very flat base most of the time. And that base is usually 2,000 to 3,000 feet above the surrounding terrain. So what you want to do here is stay out of the rain shafts. The rain shafts are associated and actually create the downdrafts in a thunderstorm. So in this slide and the next, you can see I'm sort of working my way around those rain shafts, and you can see off in the distance it looks pretty decent. So sometimes going underneath is an option as well, especially if you can't stay visual at a higher altitude. And then I think I got one final slide on this section is, if you get boxed in and you have to penetrate a cloud with significant vertical development, once you get your power set for maneuvering speed, don't mess around with it. You're going to end up chasing your airspeed indicator, and it's going to get you in trouble. And remember, your maneuvering speed is not the published maneuvering speed. That's for gross weight. So you really want to be way down into the low 120s if you're going to be penetrating any significant vertically developed cloud. Don't turn back. This is a bit controversial, but for the most part, I think it's better just to continue straight ahead. And here's the 3 reasons why. The first is the average diameter of an air mass thunderstorm is 8 to 10 miles. And chances are you're probably 3 or 4 miles in that thunderstorm before you realize that you are in trouble. And therefore, turning around would probably encompass more transiting of that thunderstorm. The second reason is you're probably experiencing some pretty significant gust loads in that thunderstorm. And when you bank an aircraft, you increase wing loading. And the last thing you want to do in that situation is increase wing loading. And then finally, just making a turn in extreme turbulence or severe turbulence may create spatial disorientation. So you may end up just losing control as a result. So the odds-on favorite is probably just to continue and not turn around. If you're going to talk to ATC, you want to be talking to approach control, not center. Center has NEXRAD. That's their weather input. That's probably what got you in trouble in the first place. So relying on NEXRAD is probably not going to get you out of trouble. I would rely on approach control, which has real-time weather. And if you're talking to center, ask to be switched to an approach control. Tighten up your safety belts. You all know when you're flying cross-country in the Cirrus, that belt buckle works its way up to your solar plexus, and it's not doing you much good. It needs to be below your belly button. So tighten up the safety belts. At night, turn the cabin lights up. Don't look out. You're not going to like what you see anyways. So just turn the cabin lights up and keep your head down and look at your attitude indicator. And I want you to fly attitude, not altitude. Don't worry about excursions off your assigned altitude. Trust me, you're probably the only idiot in that thunderstorm. And going up or down in that thunderstorm, you're not going to hit anybody else. If you want to make it official, you can ask for a block altitude. The last time Jerry asked for a block altitude in the thunderstorm, they gave him surface to 40,000 feet. Let ATC know what's going on. They're probably aware anyways. And use gentle control inputs when you're bounced around in there. So we'll pause again for some questions.
Hey, Bill, yeah, we're getting quite a commentary here. It's really funny.
No, that's good. That's good. I mean, don't believe everything I say.
Well, everybody's going back and forth on different items. This one came in from David, and I think he says, I recall him saying that you need 13 degrees centigrade for sufficient moisture to form thunderstorms, and this is in relationship to a 13-degree dew point for the summer. And then he goes on to say, hey, we had some wicked storms with hail in the New York area with the dew points between 6 and 9. Am I making that question coherent enough for you to answer, Bill?
Yeah, I think you are, John, but I think we're beating that topic to death, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. Yeah, I think, the meteorologists teach that in general, it takes dew points above 13 degrees Celsius on the surface in order to have that level of warmth in the atmosphere to contain that much water. Now, that doesn't mean in the summer where the air is drier that you're not going to have a thunderstorm or a thunderstorm with hail. You can still have that with dew points that are much less. These aren't fixed items or fixed levels. So I want you to be careful with the way you treat that. So.
Fair enough. Joe is asking, in general, when trying to work your way through storms similar to the ones shown in your photo, is it a better strategy to file IFR or VFR, and why?
You'll get different answers from different instructors, but I have gone so far as to actually cancel IFR when I'm dealing with an area of air mass thunderstorms. If it's going to be as tight as it was in that picture, I think I had actually in that picture canceled IFR. I think that was in Florida, and went VFR. And the advantage of canceling IFR or not even filing IFR is that you have altitude capabilities from 0 to flight level 180 or 17,999 feet to get technical. You have the ability to deviate where and when you want to without having to ask anybody to do that. Now, you do have to worry about airspace, potential airspace incursions when you're VFR, but I think it gives you a lot more flexibility if you're VFR. And IFR magazine, which I read religiously, came out and talked about not even filing an instrument flight plan if you're going to be dealing with thunderstorms, depending, of course, on your departure and destination weather.
Great. One from Mike saying, while in flight, is looking at the lightning strikes on your MFD a helpful indicator of the location of a thunderstorm, understanding that it can be delayed?
Yeah, we're going to get into that in the next section. So that's a good segue. So let me hold that question until we get into that into the next section.
Sounds good. Let's go.
Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about NEXRAD. Now, we do a whole section on this at the CPPs, and I've taken just portions of my discussion of NEXRAD tips and tricks just to point out a few things. And the first thing I want to point out is contour. The thunderstorm in this picture on this MFD is tightly contoured. If you look at the bottom portion of that thunderstorm, the gradient of change between green and yellow and red and purple is very tightly spaced. That's tight contouring. That's what I mean by tight contouring. And when you see that on your, whether you get your NEXRAD from the government, from XM, whether you have it on your iPad or your MFD, when you see that tight contouring, you want to give that a wider berth. That's a significantly mature thunderstorm. This picture I brought into the webinar to kind of discuss thunderstorm movement, which was where that gentleman's question on lightning strikes was going. So there are three ways basically to assess thunderstorm movement. One is using refresh, or if you have the fancy NXI or on your iPad you can loop it, then you get a really pretty good idea of the trend for thunderstorms. If you don't have that, you're going to have to use refresh. And the only downside to refresh is that you got to do it 3 or 4 times, which means with a 3 to 5 minute refresh, you got to do it further out to get a sense of where those air mass thunderstorms are moving. Now, the second way to assess thunderstorm movement is to use a skit. Now, the picture I have again here is Avidine, and that blue circle with the arrow pointing downwards is the skit. It stands for Storm Cell Identification and Tracking. You have the same thing with Garmin. It just looks a little different. It's a square with a white center and an arrow attached to that square. And that's how Garmin represents the skit. The skits can be misleading. I have a picture that I show at the CPPP of one where the skits are going all kinds of different directions. So you can't rely just on the skit. You can't rely just on the refresh. You got to combine all three. And the third is the lightning strikes. Now, most of us leave our storm scopes on cell or strike mode. And again, I go into some of that, which is better, cell or strike mode? And the answer is it depends. It depends on whether you're dealing with developing air mass thunderstorms or mature stage thunderstorms, but we're not going to get into that discussion. What I'm going to suggest, at least for a portion of the time where you're working around thunderstorms, is you switch it to data link lightning. That's the third selection under most storm scopes. Now, data link is delayed. There's a time stamp on that lightning strike, and the older it is, the darker the lightning strike gets. So the olive drab lightning strikes in this picture are older than the yellow, and the yellow older than the white. But where this can help you is in this example, the skit is pointing downward, and the trend for the lightning goes from old, younger, youngest, and it's in the same direction. So that builds confidence that this thunderstorm is really moving in that direction. And note again how tightly contoured that is. Again, the distance between the green, the yellow, the red, and the purple is very tightly contoured in that picture. I like to throw this one up, but it makes a point, and that point is critical to understand, and we'll get into it in just a second. But as you can see at the bottom of the screen, we have an area of precipitation that is shallow contouring. The gradient of change between the green and the yellow is not tight. So I flew through that. And now I'm coming up on this thunderstorm, which obviously is very tightly contoured. Again, that gradient of change between green, yellow, and red is very tightly contoured. So what the hell am I doing here? Well, this is the picture out my window. And this reinforces, and I think it's an incredibly important point to make, do not, under any circumstances, use NEXRAD to tactically deviate around thunderstorms. You can use it strategically tactically to go around an area of thunderstorms, but don't tactically deviate in and around an area of air mass thunderstorms using NEXRAD, because you're going to get in trouble. This tightly contoured thunderstorm was off my left wing, and the other one was off my right wing, and I was in clear air between those two thunderstorms. So adhere to my rule of staying visual. If you can't stay visual, that's a no-go situation, because this is the trap you're going to get into, and you don't want to get there, trust me. And then finally, one last picture here on the NEXRAD, and unfortunately it looks like we're running out of time, but I have a singular air mass thunderstorm here. It's tightly contoured, but you can see the entire outline of that thunderstorm. It is tightly contoured at the top of the thunderstorm, loosely contoured at the bottom, but don't think that you can cut corners around that thunderstorm because the theory or the rule of thumb is that the chance of encountering extreme or destructive turbulence within that air mass thunderstorm is the same no matter where you are in that thunderstorm. So don't think you can cut the corner and get away with it, because you may get pounded or hammered pretty good there. All right, that finishes up, and we can entertain questions for as long as anybody wants to stay on.
Awesome. Hey, Bill, you know, we were talking about your 5 rules of flying in weather. One of them was stay visual. Everybody, you know, wasn't quick enough to write down the 4 other ones, if you would, please.
Well, I didn't talk about the 4 other ones because they're relevant to icing. There's a 20-20 rule that above, or temperatures colder than -20 and above 20,000 feet, you're not going to encounter thunderstorms. And then rule number 3 is in the mountains, all bets are off because of the orographic lifting. So I really don't want to get into all those without the ability to explain it.
That's fair, very fair. Michael was asking about hail avoidance techniques. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, you can find hail even in clear air around thunderstorms, air mass thunderstorms. If you find a mature stage, and it's another reason why to give the mature stage a much wider berth than the dissipating stage. But if you find an anvil off a mature stage thunderstorm, this is where you're most likely to encounter hail. And I have some personal experience associated with that back in the 1980s in a Cessna 340. And I wasn't even underneath the anvil. I was some distance out from the anvil, but it was a powerful enough storm to hurl hail well outside the anvil, but especially avoid the anvil side of a mature stage thunderstorm.
Great advice. How do you handle thunderstorms weather data when you're out of radar range, like in Montana or the Dakotas?
Yeah, or even Oregon, where I live. Central Oregon is not well covered. I think, again, I use NEXRAD as a supplement. I spend more of my time looking outside and staying visual and visually moving around those thunderstorms. If you can't see the thunderstorms and you're relying on NEXRAD, you're going to get into trouble. So NEXRAD is neat. It warns you that you're approaching an area of air mass thunderstorms, but once you're in it, you need to use your eyeballs to stay out of the thunderstorms.
Yep, stay visual. Always good advice. Is there a lightning detection option from ADS-B? If so, is it useful?
Yes, there is. And from ADS-B in, it does have lightning. I'm not sure whether it's currently just cloud to cloud or cloud to ground lightning, but you can use it in the same way. If it's time stamped, it's going to change colors. And where it's helpful is that direction of movement of the thunderstorm. If you're using it mainly in cell mode, then you're looking for clustering. The problem is the clustering worked well on the storm scopes themselves. And when we had, back in the days when we had the 430s, it worked very well. But when they tried to extrapolate it to the MFD, the algorithms just don't work as well for the clustering. And so I get mixed feelings from the cell mode for light.
Got it. Yeah, another NEXRAD question in terms of using it strategically. Is it safe to assume that the direction and the trend will be consistent, or are there situations where the direction will change?
I think for the most part, it's going to be fairly consistent. You know, you can get in a situation where the thunderstorms start to turn right relative to an east-west line. And when that happens, you need to give those a wider berth. They tend to have enough energy to overcome some of the Coriolis effects of the Earth's rotation. So you can get a little bit of change where it'll go from west to an east direction to a west to a southeast direction. Now, I'm not talking about storms that start in the northwest and go to the southeast. I'm talking about where they suddenly turn right. Those become more significant. So, but in general, it's not going to change direction significantly.
Okay. And then Rick is looking for maybe some more clarity on the green, yellow, red radar returns. Are all of them thunderstorms or just some of them, or how do you tell?
Yeah, no. So if anything contains red, or you have to look at your color scale coding. What you're looking for are colors that are at or exceed 40 decibels. So if you're using government rather than XM, you need to understand the color scale. But the number you're looking for is anything that exceeds 40 decibels. That's going to be a thunderstorm.